Hello and welcome to the Geeks a Week podcast. I'm Whoosh.
I'm Paul.
I'm Zach.
I'm Andrew, and the following podcast does not contain spoilers for games. Not.
This will be a two-parter discussing franchises. So last time we talked pretty much just about video games. This is going to be franchises and everything. Movies, books, games, TV shows, anything. Any sort of entertainment media, franchises as a whole. We'll talk about why they exist, what keeps them going, and why it seems like a certain subset of people on the internet hate the concept of sequels. So I think the biggest thing with franchises is you see a lot, especially in movies. I mean, it's not just movies, but it tends to be in films and even games now, because games are becoming a bigger and bigger revenue generator. You know, it's becoming a bigger part of society. Is that someone will come out with an idea, something cool, neat, interesting, a new intellectual property, and it will make a lot of money, and then they will begin pumping out sequels that weren't planned, that weren't supposed to be made, until it essentially burns out. A really good example of this in the movie sphere is actually Saw. The first movie, I haven't actually seen in a long time, but I did see it, and I thought it was okay. I'm not a big fan of horror movies, but I thought it was alright. And I think now they're up to like 8 Saw movies, 8 or 9 if I'm not mistaken. So you have this movie that was
Isn't Jigsaw the next one?
Yeah, Jigsaw's the next one, so I mean, obviously it counts, but again, I don't know.
Actually looks interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen a Saw movie, but it
And
actually looked alright.
And I saw like the 4th or the 5th one, and you can kind of, and I mean, from what I've read with the other ones, they've kind of, in the more recent ones, they've kind of started working in sort of like this overall mythology and different connections. But you can tell with 2 and 3 and 4 and what have you, that they weren't really supposed to be other movies. This was supposed to be standalone. It was supposed to be sort of a one-off. And because it was so successful, I think the budget was something like $1 million.
They kind of just started making stuff up.
Right,
To keep it going.
Right, exactly, because they had now a built-in fan base. And this is where I think franchises sort of get their momentum from, or their capability to exist. Because people are curious, but they're also weirdly afraid of things they don't know. So if you go to the movies, and not a lot of people spend time, watching a bunch of trailers, reading reviews and stuff. They go to the theater Saturday afternoon. What title sounds good? Okay, we'll watch that. Oh, I've heard of Fast and Furious 5. The 8th one has to be 40% better, right? It's number 8, and I've only seen number 5. So, so you have this sort of thing where people are afraid of things that they haven't heard of or seen, and so they stick with what's familiar. I mean, look at Transformers. I don't know if there's anybody who actually does any thinking when they watch a movie that would say that those movies are good, or that there's anything really positive about them from sort of a production filmmaking standpoint. But they watch Transformers because they've seen the other ones, and they know that this is something safe. This is something that they know will entertain them for 2 or 2.5 hours, maybe even 3. I know they're getting stupidly long at this point. And they're afraid to spend so much money or buy a ticket for something that they haven't seen. And of course the same goes with video games. Video games being actually significantly more expensive than a movie ticket.
Well, yeah, getting to the movie is kind of an expensive trip now, so you can see why they would want to make the safe decision, but that's why they usually do go with franchises, because, like you said, it's a familiar title.
So does that mean that franchises then would be something where it's kind of a new phenomenon, or this? Because again, this extends to books and everything. With obviously, books have been published for a long time now. They're where people have this. Oh, I don't want to buy into some new book. I would rather buy this 3rd book in this series that I'm reading. Because I don't think the prices of books have. Oh, sorry.
No, I don't know.
Because I think
books, you can't compare them to video games, though.
Well, they're
Like,
pieces of
not-
media. I mean, the whole point of this is people only have so many hours in the day that they can use to entertain themselves, and that's going to depend on their life situation. Right now, we have quite a bit of free time. We don't have kids. whatever. We're not out struggling with jobs, things like that. So we have a fair amount of free time that we can dedicate to things. A lot of people don't. You have kids, that takes up a huge portion of your time. Some people might have jobs where they work more, might have 2 jobs. So you have this really strong competition between pieces of entertainment for, that person's money, that person's time. And now video games are still fairly new. I mean, they've been around really in the mainstream probably the last 15 years, I'd say, and been around as a thing for less than 50 or around 50 years. That's new on the grand scheme of things. Movies have been around for over 100. TV shows, obviously, roughly the same amount of time, a little bit less. Of course, there's still radio programs. Not that they're that big anymore, but they exist, and they've been around for a while. And you have books, which have been around for hundreds of years. So you have a whole new thing that never existed before that's now also competing for someone's money and some, obviously, their money. They don't care if you enjoy the thing, really, unless they make a sequel to it or something else. They just want the money, and that's it.
Right.
Well, that is also why Hollywood tends to make franchises and why they favor franchise series is because it's a guarantee to make more money than a standalone film. I mean, The Mummy was supposed to be the setup for a whole franchise, and it looked like just a standalone film, but it actually was a franchise starter just because that had the potential to bring in more revenue.
So that brings us to, because that's a perfect example of this concept of cinematic universes. This was part of the reason I wanted to talk about this subject here, because Marvel came out with the Avengers, and nobody thought this was going to be successful, and now they have basically a money printing machine. They pump out a movie, spend $150 million on it, and it's going to turn into 700, 800, maybe even $1 billion at the box office every single time. And they seem to do a good job of, because they haven't had any bad reviewed movies. I think Thor: The Dark World is the lowest, and that's like 60 something on Rotten Tomatoes. Which, you've put out, 12 or 13 movies now, and the worst movie you've made is Thor 2: The Dark World? That's really impressive. So these Marvel films now, as a moviegoer, are a safe bet. Oh, look, that's Marvel's Ant-Man. It's Ant-Man, and he made almost $400 million at the box office. I don't know if anybody even knew who he was before Marvel turned him into, another one of their cinematic universe movies. But this comes out, and now you have all these other companies that are trying to tack on this sort of cinematic universe thing because it's a franchise. Like you said with The Mummy, that was supposed to start a new one. But I think it comes down again to people missing what makes Marvel movies work. They did Iron Man. Iron Man is a standalone film. It's a complete arc. It's a standalone movie. The only thing that connects it, aside from the characters and even sets up another world, is future movies, is the teaser at the very end of the credits that I doubt a lot of people saw in the first get-go, when Samuel L. Jackson, as Nick Fury, comes out and says, the Avengers Initiative. That's it. There's nothing else in that movie that says anything. Well, I guess there's Rhodey commenting next time, but aside from those 2 little things, there's nothing that says this is going to be another, there's going to be more movies in this. So they earned.
That's really the thing with Rhodey, is really more of a reference than a.
Right, exactly, and that's, you can totally
an Easter egg or something.
Yes, exactly,
like
and Marvel's done a ton of those. So that's why I didn't really want to bring that up, but I thought someone's gonna say, "Oh, but he says this," so I thought I should just bring it in. But yes, you're right. It's more of as an Easter egg, as a wink to comic book people, as to something they say, "Hey, there's gonna be more. You haven't spent all your money yet. We haven't gotten it all." So you have DC and now Universal with their monster movies are trying to make this right away. They aren't making a good movie. They're trying to make a movie.
Legendary?
Isn't it Universal? I thought it was a Universal monster.
You're talking
movies.
about.
Well, Legendary has their MonsterVerse with Godzilla and King Kong, and then Universal has their Dark Universe.
Well, I was gonna wait to
That's
talk
like
about.
Mummy and what, like Werewolf?
Yeah, Werewolf,
Thing, stuff like
Dracula, Swamp Thing. I was gonna talk about the the monster one with Godzilla in a bit, because they're doing that right as well. That's another successful way to go about that, where they've done it the right way. But they're just going and saying, okay, we just want this money, and we're not going to try to earn it. And we've seen, I mean, aside from Batman vs. Superman, which still did not make that much money at the box office in the grand scheme of things, where people are punishing them for it. They are saying, we want to see good movies, and that's it. So Marvel is continuing to put out good movies. They continue to make money. DC says, we just want to make the money from the Marvel, not the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Jesus, was it the DCEU?
Yeah, the DC
Yeah.
extended universe.
Yeah. So they're just like, well, we're just going to outright and say that this is not the last movie. This is not going to be complete. There's not going to be any sort of resolution, or this is not the end of the story. Keep giving us your money. And we've seen time and again where, aside from Wonder Woman, which I've been told is a great movie, that they haven't really done that well at the box office. And we saw what happened with The Mummy. The Mummy bombed pretty bad at the box office, again, because it wasn't a conclusive film. It spent way too much of its time trying to build itself up to say, hey, look, we're going to be just like Marvel, without actually earning it. And so this, I think, is sort of leading to this backlash against the concept of franchises as a whole, because people like to make blanket statements without there being any sort of, I don't want to say any thought into it, but without there being a lot of thought about it. Oh, franchises are bad because people just want all my money. Where I look at something, if I enjoy a thing, I like there to be more of that thing. So a perfect example is the Hobbit movies. Should have been 2? Yes. I like the extended versions better than the regular cuts because it adds more content into something I enjoy. It's the same thing with Lord of the Rings. I mean, the Lord of the Rings extended cuts are just vastly superior films, but I just like the fact that there's more of stuff that I enjoy. Because I already enjoy Lord of the Rings. If you give me more Lord of the Rings, I'm going to enjoy that.
Yeah, actually, I saw the regular cut on TV once after being so used to the extended cut, and I didn't recognize the movie hardly.
Feels really choppy, and
They
it's,
took a lot of important scenes out.
and
yeah.
and it's funny because they're already really long, and you watch them and they're great films, but then they add this extra 40 minutes, or I think Return of the King is like an extra hour and a half or something like that added. It's like, oh my god, and it's even better. It's like, Jackson, if you added 2 days to this, how good would it be, you know? But it's and Valerian, a perfect example of what I wanted to highlight with people not really being able to make up their own minds. It's I subscribe to Reddit. I use Reddit every single day, and I subscribe to the movies subreddit, and pretty much 2, maybe even 3 times a week, someone makes a thread complaining about how every movie coming out is a sequel or a reboot or something like that, and no one makes any original movies. Someone commented on Valerian that, oh, they actually probably would have enjoyed the movie, but they had never heard of it before, and so they didn't bother going to see it because obviously it's not a sequel, it can't be good. So I checked on their history. No, it's right, yes, for real. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of what they said. It was a little bit longer than that, but I'm trying to condense it. So I went to their post history, and not 2 weeks ago, they had complained about how everything in theaters is a sequel or a reboot or a remake, and there's nothing original. Now, Valerian is based off of a comic, a fairly popular French comic, or fairly popular French comic in France. It's not really big anywhere else. So a lot of people outside of France would have known about it. So to basically everybody, it's new. It did not do that well at the box office. It's going to bomb hard because people don't know about it being a franchise. Or there's no connection to anything else. So you have people complaining about how none of this stuff exists, but then this kind of stuff comes out and they don't go to see it. And there's exceptions to that. You have things like Get Out. What was the other big one that came out this year that did quite well? That wasn't really, I mean, no connection to anything at all. Baby Driver did pretty well at the box office as well. So it happens, but as a
I've seen a
rule-
lot of good reviews for that, yeah.
Right. So it happens. I mean, there's obviously going to be exceptions to prove the rule. That's not what I'm trying to say. But as a whole, people complain about stuff, but then continue to consume that kind of stuff anyways. And it's like, you shouldn't be embarrassed about the things you like. If you like Transformers, I mean that's fine. You can like that, but don't go, oh, I want there to be original movies. I hate the fact that everything in the theaters is something something 4, and then the only movies you see are something with a 2, 3, or 4 in them. You know, it's like they don't know what they want.
Yeah. People do keep perpetuating that. They keep going to see it. I mean, that's why they made a TMNT 2 and like all the Transformers.
But I wonder.
But
Oh, sorry.
I take back what I said about Baby Driver. I think it's going to be a cult classic and not unacclaimed film.
But can it something be successful and still be considered a cult classic?
Yeah, I think so.
Because
I
it's
mean,
it's
If
done.
the budget's small enough.
Okay, because it's done fairly well from what I've seen. Obviously it's still playing in theaters as of right now. It's probably made like 95% of the money it's gonna make, but it's still playing, so we don't have final numbers yet. But it looks like it's gonna be fairly profitable. So you have again, this is an example of a new IP coming out where people do go to see it, and again, it has a smaller budget, so it didn't need a huge box office take to be profitable, and that helps because now you're seeing things in franchises. Pirates of the Caribbean is a perfect example of this, of these insanely bloated budgets where you have, because that would have been what, the 5th movie in the franchise. I don't want to know how much they spent on it, but it was well over $250 million. I mean, that's an absurd amount of money. And I think what's happening is as the movie ticket prices go up, you're seeing people go, one, they want something that's safe, but they also want something that's going to be worth seeing in theaters, and that usually comes down to something with really good sound, really good special effects. Valerian is a perfect example. That's not going to be that fun to watch at home. Even if it's on 4K, you're getting a much better experience in the theater than you could get at home unless you have billions of dollars to throw on a 30-speaker setup and somehow can connect 15 4K TVs to get the same size as a...
Billions.
Anyways, you understand, not a lot of people are going to have the kind of money that they can just piss away on some kind of theater setup like that, like it's nothing. So you start to see these movies becoming sort of these bombastic spectacles and less about, anything else really, because they have to get you in the seat to get you to pay the $15, $20, $25 for a ticket and feel like you got your money's worth out of it. And we're starting to see the same thing happen with games, too, where they're adding... we talked about this in our open world discussion we had a bit ago, where it seems like everything is becoming open world, even if it doesn't need to be. Because the game itself isn't more expensive, because they've been $60 since the 360 launched. But with all the extra content stuff that's added, I know, like Assassin's Creed Origins, that would be $90 to buy the game and everything, the DLC and what have you. That's a lot of money to drop at one time for a piece of entertainment. It's not like internet, it's not like electricity or whatever, it's a game. And they're asking people to drop $90 on it, so how do you convince them that it's worthwhile? You have to give them hundreds of hours of content.
A kick-ass trailer.
Well, that helps to
I mean,
to market the film. Yeah, and trailers are becoming more. And I don't fall into this whole trailer spoil more than they ever used to, because that is fundamentally just not true. There's trailers from older movies that give away a lot of stuff, so I don't feel that that's a new thing. I think what it is, because people have access to trailers more. I mean, before the only times you'd see trailers is before some other movie, and probably occasionally on TV. But now you go to YouTube. I don't know how often you'd see a trailer for a movie as an ad, but I'm sure it's fairly frequently, particularly if you are someone who goes on YouTube to watch movie stuff, because it keeps track of what you watch and say, oh, this person likes to watch movies. Here's some movie trailers. You're getting bombarded with these ads constantly, and you have to come up with something new and unique for every spot that you make. You'll have the teaser for the trailer, and then you usually have 3 or maybe 4 trailers, possibly 5, and then you'll have a couple of different TV spots too. So you're talking about, in all told, you're looking at like 15 minutes of content that you're using as advertising for a movie that's probably 2 hours long.
Also, some people like to know what the movie's going to contain.
Yes, and that's another thing that's come up as well is people, and this gets back to the whole people, like what they know. They want to see something that they're familiar with. So even if it's something that's new, if you can give them basically the entire point of the movie, people will feel more familiar with it and will be more likely, of course, to actually spend the money to see it in a theater. And I think that could be part of the reason why that it feels that way is because they're doing a good job of basically telling you everything about the movie without necessarily spoiling anything. And that way you feel like, oh, this is something I already know. But I've never, and it's something maybe I'd like to look into to see if there's like a sudden spike in the number of book series that get published in, maybe the last 20 or 30 years versus, even a few decades ago. Because I feel like people...
I'm sure there are.
But I wonder, is that because...
It used to be considered unfashionable to make sequels.
Oh, it was? So it is a change in people then. I wonder why.
I mean, it's not a recent change.
Well, right, but I
It's
mean...
considered unfashionable to make a sequel.
I wonder what caused this shift then in the way, books are written then. If before you could get away with a standalone, and now you have, Game of Thrones is going to be 7 books. Brandon Sanderson wrote, or not Brandon Sanderson, Jesus Christ. What's the guy's name that did The Wheel of Time? Something Jordan. Oh, why is the name...
Drawing a blank.
I know. Anyways, people know what we're talking about when we say the Wheel of Time series. That's like 12 books. So you have these, these are just massive, sprawling... it would take someone months. And, again, I think that has to do with the fact that they're competing now with various other media that they didn't have to before. So they want to give you something, that you can keep coming back to that feels familiar. But, again, it's book 4 in the series. It's going to be different than book 3. Things like that. Even something like the Night's Dawn trilogy by Peter F. Hamilton. Those are long-ass books. They're all over 1,000 pages. And that's absurdly long. So you have probably close to 33 or 3,400 pages of book for this trilogy of this one story. That's absurdly long. That's probably a 4 or 5 season TV show. Well, The Expanse is another great example of a huge book series. I think they've published 6 or 7 now, and I think it's going to be 9 or 10 long. So again, you have these huge, just sweeping, months-long reading things. Whereas, like Andrew pointed out, you might have before, you didn't write a sequel because that's bad.
Well, they didn't do it. It's considered.
Right, but I'm not. When I say stuff like that, you gotta understand. I don't mean that it never ever happened once. As a general rule, it didn't occur. In the same way, most of the time when people start their car, it doesn't start on fire. I'm not saying that it never happens, but it's not something that happens enough to be worthwhile to discuss.
You'd hope so.
Well, you were gonna say something, Zach?
Yeah, I think part of the appeal that a consumer would have with a franchise is it's more story to have. Like when you finish up a series, it kind of sucks. So if it's a long franchise, it's a longer time before you have to worry about that. If it's a single movie, then you just watch it and you're done. But you can get invested into a franchise.
So you have something like Star Wars, and I think Star Wars is kind of probably part of the reason, at least from a film perspective, that you're seeing things like this happen. Because the first movie is it's a full, complete story. Everything that you need is closed and completed. You have the arcs are complete for the characters. But George had always planned it to be, multiple movies. So I'm wondering if something like that is kind of getting lost now in this way that you can make something standalone, but still continue off of that in future iterations. If you read something like, take for example, the first Game of Thrones book and finished it, there's nothing that's complete. Nothing is finished, nothing's resolved. And I wonder if we won't see a resurgence here in the next few years or so in something where you can make a single piece of that, feel complete, but then continue to build off of that. Halo is another perfect example from a game's perspective. The first
I was going
story,
to say Combat Evolved
right?
wrapped
It's
up pretty nicely,
yes,
but
it's
left it open enough for a sequel.
exactly, and that's again where you start, and it seems to be where you're able to do that. You can be quite successful. So it kind of makes me wonder why that isn't done more, where you sort of come out with something, and I don't just mean little winks and teasers that there's going to be a sequel, but that you finish it up, no mention of there being anything else, and then you make the next piece in that story built off the ending of the first one, where it feels important, but it doesn't feel like it's tacked on. Assassin's Creed is actually another good example of that. I mean, there's the whole end where you see the other stuff, but the story was fairly complete at that point, at least with Altair, and of course now we learn there's other stuff going on with Desmond because they expand the mythology. But at that point, it felt like, okay, that you get that emotional release of, oh, this is, we're done. I finished this. Okay, that's fine. You feel okay about it. Whereas when it's not done, you go, okay, what's next? And I mean, I'm not talking like people are stressing out about this, but it's sort of a little mental thing, like, because you can tell, and it's with patterns too, with music. You can feel when something isn't complete, like da da da. There's supposed to be one more da, and it stresses you out for, I don't know if there's another term for that, until that other da is made, that other sound comes out.
Closure?
Yeah.
For closure? Is there
Yes.
another word for that?
There's gotta be. Andrew, come on, help us out.
Nah.
So it's this sort of thing where, and I don't know why people can't pick that up. I never even thought about that until recently, but it's like that's sort of the way it happens. And we'll see if Doom, because Doom's another game that sort of, and I'm sure there's going to be a sequel. There has to be. It was way too popular for there not to be, where the story's basically complete, but that one does kind of have the whole built-in sequel hook to it. So I don't know if that would technically count. But again, you have everything's complete. The arc's complete. You have closure. You're done. You set out and you completed the goal that needed to be completed. And now we'll see with the sequel how they're going to be able to build on that. Again, assuming there is one, I don't know for sure. I'd be absolutely floored if there isn't.
Well, there's always more demons.
Well, right, of course, obviously, there's always more demons. There's always, I mean, now I wonder though, like with something like that, from a game design perspective, I mean, how are you going to make it to where it can feel even bigger and, better than that one? Because everything was already so over the top. And that's another problem with franchises and continuations, is it always has to be...
Borderlands did a good job.
Yes, Borderlands is a good example of a game sort of having a complete
An
arc.
over-the-top mentality and then doing it better.
But I wonder if you get to the point where you've just peaked and you can't do it anymore. It becomes so ridiculous that it's not even worth investing in anything, because it's just so absurd that there's no logic behind any of it.
We'll see when Borderlands 3, the fourth one, comes out.
That's not the official title, by the way. I can't remember what they called it, but I was disappointed.
Dang,
I know.
looking forward to that.
I was disappointed too. I thought, oh, that'd be a great title for this, Borderlands 3, the fourth one. So, what about franchises then, where things are completely different? For example, Final Fantasy. There's 15 main Final Fantasy games, and none of them have any sort of storyline connection to any of the other ones. Concepts are the same, certain world elements are the same, but the actual plots have no influence. So do you think that might be something that can sort of invade itself into other mediums to keep things where it's the same franchise, but everything can be fresh?
I think that might be just a Japanese concept, and only JRPGs or other such things like that are going to follow that pattern.
Now, doesn't
There's a lot of animes like that, where like there's a spin-off series.
But what I'm talking about is, okay,
Separate world.
So what I'm saying is something like, okay, we'll just stick with Transformers because that's pretty popular. People should know what that is. So you have Transformers 1. It's a full, complete everything, problem solved, world is saved, whatever. And then Transformers 2 comes out, and Transformers are in it, but none of the characters are the same. It makes no references to anything that happened in the past. And there's a new problem that they have to
That
do.
might work out better than what they're doing now, but I don't
Well,
think
right.
they're gonna do that.
No, I'm not saying that if they are. I'm saying, do you think that some franchise in another medium that's not a video game, because I just happen to pick Final Fantasy 15 as an example, if they could do something like that and have success with it? Because again, you get the franchise sort of base built in, but then you're able to do new things without being tied down to what came previously, while still carrying over some, plot elements, or, like Chocobos carry over and things like that, where you can have, okay, Transformers 2 still has Transformers, but the Transformers are different, and if there's human characters, the human characters are different, and they're not connected to any of the previous ones. Or do you think there'd be too much backlash from that people just wouldn't enjoy it?
I don't know. People like kind of confusing.
It might be confusing, yeah. It would have to be explained, I'm sure, to a lot of the non-hardcore fans.
Because the thing is, people who watch movies most of them are more casual.
You wanted to say dumb. You wanted to say dumb so bad. But I wonder, is there, I mean...
But video games, they will tend to be a little more.
But I think
informed.
that's right, because I think there's a bigger investment in a game. I mentioned the price of stuff earlier. I mean, you think your standard video game is $60 in the U.S. Okay, so there's that price, and you have movie tickets that can range from small towns of $7 into major cities to close to $20. So now you say, okay, I could go to a movie in a smaller town for $8 and then a drink and a popcorn, so that's $13, maybe $14. Or if I live in a major city, you're looking at something like 30, 35, or 40 per person. So that's almost the price of a video game. And this is for, maybe 2.5 hours of entertainment. You buy a video game, obviously depending on what kind of game it is, you're looking at anywhere from 20 to, if it's got a multiplayer component, technically an infinite amount of return on your dollar. You spend 60.
Well, there's a lot of real short games, but
Well,
they're
right,
pretty
and
cheap.
I'm just sticking with the $60 price point because that's where AAA's are at, and it's easy to discuss it in sort of terms of one thing, but or one sort of level. But yes, you're right. There are indie games that are much shorter that cost way less, and you also have games like Minecraft that are still cheaper than your AAA game, but offer again what amounts to infinite amount of stuff to do, of content that's available. And I think part of that is why games which didn't have multiplayer components are starting to add them. We saw that with Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. They added a multiplayer component again. Not that Assassin's Creed's ever really been lacking content, at least when it comes to side crap to do. But now it's the way, okay, now you have all this other stuff to convince people to drop all this money. Plus, it makes it easier to monetize DLC. And we're starting to see this trend towards microtransactions. So it's kind of funny to see how the industries will adapt to sort of changes in the market and the way people react to things. Especially in the same franchise. I mean, Assassin's Creed had nothing to do with multiplayer at all. That was just added. I didn't even know if it was mentioned at all before the game even came out. I mean, I'm sure it was, but I was never really into following stuff when that one came out, so that was a big deal.
No, they definitely talked about it.
Okay. I mean, I figured they
so.
would have, but I don't remember a whole lot from back then. Again, I wasn't super into following video games or movies or anything like that at that point, so I honestly probably could have just glossed over it and not even thought about it. So I guess, what do you, if you were to have to sort of pick, your perfect setting for like a story to take place or what have you, would you prefer there to be sequels? Do you want it to be something that's done in one go? Or, what would be your ideal sort of thing to consume, I guess?
I generally do enjoy sequels if it's in something that I like. I mean, if it was wrapped up and it's conclusive, then I kind of get a little sketchy about a sequel. But if they purposely left it open, then I get pretty excited for
So
it.
I guess when you hear that there's a sequel coming out to something, let's just say this is something you didn't know for sure there was going to be one, but it was something you enjoyed. Do you feel happy about that, or do you feel dread that, okay, now I have to go do this for however many hours to keep up with everything?
I mostly I'm excited. There's obviously a few exceptions where I'm trying to think of an example where something was wrapped up really well, and I heard there was a sequel, and I got, I don't know, worried that it was going to do bad or something.
Do
But
better?
I can't think of one off the top of my head.
But generally, if it's something you enjoy, you want there to be more of it, regardless of whether or not it's something that's set up or teased or anything like that, in sort of whatever medium it is.
Generally, yeah.
What about you, Andrew?
There's definitely some movies that they made sequels to. I'm like, I like the movie, but it's like, no, I need a sequel.
Do you have any examples?
Maybe Terminator, like after.
But you know what, and that's a good
three.
one. That's a great one to bring up because you're right. That's something that I did want to get into, and I'm really glad you brought that up because you have Terminator, and you're right. It completely wraps everything up. It seems closed, but then you have the sequel come out, and this is widely regarded as one of, if not the best sequels ever made. So how do you go into this, what's your thought behind? Wait a minute, and I mean, we obviously wouldn't have been old enough to experience this in theaters or anything like that, but to say, oh, and it came out a while after it too, so oh yeah, that movie that came out 7 years ago that was completely done, oh look, here's a sequel. I wonder if people felt like at that time if that was just a cheap cash grab before they realized that it's actually, I mean, a legitimately excellent film from top to bottom. I mean, it's widely considered the best action film ever.
I don't know, whatever, but it is really good.
Well, I mean, that's again just sort of the general
At
consensus.
the time, I don't think they did think it was a cash grab, because it just wasn't. Hollywood wasn't as much of a cash cow back then as it is now.
Well, I think you're seeing box numbers being reported more, but you have to remember, like, they're reporting record numbers every year, but that doesn't adjust for inflation. So if a movie makes the same amount of movie it did previously with the same budget, it's gotten less money essentially because the dollar would be worth less. Now I'm not saying inflation's out of control. It's just sort of one of the natures of an economy. Is you're going to have at least a small amount of inflation, and that's fine. That's good. So you need to see these numbers increase every year, or you're getting less back. So I don't know if Hollywood's gotten any dirtier or worse or more money hungry than before. I think it's just easier for them to go about it, but it's also easier for us to see it because again we have so much more information available to us now than even a decade ago, where Rotten Tomatoes didn't exist. How did you know if a movie was good? You would have to individually look up each single critic to see what they thought about it, whereas now we have multiple websites that will have every single critic's review listed, and you can find them all in one place. And so everything's more transparent now than it's been in the past. But I'd like to talk to someone who would have been around back then and would have liked Terminator to see, oh, hey, when you heard about this, did you feel like, oh, look, it's a cash grab, they just want more money, it's not actually going to be good? And if the same thing would have happened with Star Wars, because you have Empire Strikes Back coming out, after this insanely popular film, that was, the arcs were completed. I wonder if people thought, oh, look, here's another cheap cash grab They made a crap ton of money, so they hastily wrote a story and filmed it without knowing that, okay, well, this was actually kind of planned from the get-go, was for it to be like this.
Kind of.
It wasn't called Episode 4, was it? When
No.
it aired? It was just Star Wars.
It was just Star Wars. The episode 4 was added later. In fact, I don't think it was added till it was released on VHS. So... And I think in theaters it was episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. So I guess by 1980 they would have added the title. Huh?
I actually think it was just called. I think it was just called The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, I guess it could have been. I don't know.
Without Star Wars.
Yeah, that's possible, I suppose. I'll have to... Because again, we wouldn't have been around for that, but... I know it wasn't the titles, or the episode numbers weren't added until well after. At least the first one was in theaters.
Right.
I guess
That is a bit too weird.
do you think that movies are getting sequels now that don't necessarily deserve them, just because something would have made money?
Nut Job 2.
Was that
that comes to mind.
or something like, well, I guess the problem is, like, I don't consume a lot of stuff unless it's in sort of a franchise. I'm kind of realizing that now as I'm trying to think of examples of things I've seen that I go, you know what, this is done, I don't want any more. Because again, if I don't like something, I'm done with it. So I was just thinking, like, wow, there's no TV shows, or I mean, a TV show sort of is like a franchise in and of itself, in that they tend to span multiple years, but you mentioned something about, we were talking earlier about things not being connected. Now, what about something like Black Mirror, where, or even The Twilight Zone, where the episodes, again, don't have any sort of connection to each other, but it's still considered sort of the same thing? I mean, the
Well,
Twilight...
that's a little different.
Well, right, but I mean,
like
it's... Go ahead.
I don't know. It's like those short story compilations they used to publish a lot.
Well, they still do stuff like that, but it's... Are you talking about, like, by the same writer, like Ray Bradbury, for example? I have a bunch of short story compilations from him, or it's one book.
Writers.
Well, right, but I'm just saying as an example like that. Because there's a lot of them now where they'll take one short story from a bunch of different writers and put that together as, like, a book. Not necessarily that it's from the same people. But yeah, short stories...
That's kind of what like Twilight Zone's like.
Because short stories were... I mean, I'm not going to say they were ever super popular, but they're way less popular than they were, 40 or 50 years ago. Arthur C. Clarke, that's all he wrote for a long time was short stories.
I think newspapers were more popular, so they would publish that. Just print media was more popular, so it made more sense to distribute it that way. And now that it's less popular, short stories are also less popular.
But don't you think that's something that could be easily published on, like, a website as well? I mean, I'm not trying to say I disagree with you. I'm just wondering, okay, right now it's cheaper to publish a book than at any point in the past. So to me, that would lend to the idea that should mean that there's more books published regardless of genre or length. Because it's, I mean, it can essentially be free. All you need is a computer, and, a vast majority of people have access to that. So the ability to publish it basically becomes free.
Yeah, you'd think there would be more, but
I wonder if it's because people
I
kind
guess
of feel
not.
let down. Like, they go, okay, I mean, even if it's free, you go, okay, that only took a half an hour for me to read instead of the normal maybe 10 or 12 hours for a book.
yeah, that's probably a lot of it. They just like longer stories. That's like what I said about people wanting to get invested into a different world or a story.
But I wonder if it's for your more casual person. Do they go, I want to be invested in something? Or is it, I want to make sure I get a good return on the amount of money that I've paid?
They want, they don't want to waste their time either.
Right, right. But I mean, is it, you're going to go, okay, I can spend $5 on this short story or $13 on this full-length novel, you know, you go, okay, well, the novel is going to last me 6 times as long for a little bit more than 2 times the price. And I'm not saying that those are prices for books, just as an example, where you go, okay, I'm going to get a better return on investment from this novel versus a short story. And I think that's kind of part of it too, where people are, you know, they want to make sure they get their money's worth because, again, they're being presented with way more options than they've ever been in the past. So they have more choices, and obviously the better ones, you would hope, theoretically, would be the ones that would kind of float to the top when it comes to getting people to use them, spend money on them.
You hope.
But again, it's a combination. It's not just
No, it
that, right? Well, yeah, no, not things don't often work like they do, you know, when you break stuff down. But even something like Transformers, again, you go, and we seem to harp on that quite a bit, but it's just because it's so ubiquitous. It's the same thing with Call of Duty. It's kind of everybody knows at least enough about it to have a general discussion. But you go, okay, the Transfer movies are really long, and I don't mind them because I just get to turn my brain off for 2.5 hours. Or I can go see something that's a little bit more thought-provoking, but is only an hour and 45 minutes. I mean, that's 45 less minutes of entertainment that you're getting, but the ticket price is obviously the same, assuming you're going to the same theater. So now you're being presented with these choices, and even though you might like the shorter one better, you don't know, but you know that you're going to like Transformers roughly this amount, you know, trying to assign a numerical value to it.
Not numerical value, but yeah.
But I mean, obviously
Yeah,
you're
I
not
mean,
thinking
I did see
about
the
that.
Third Transformers. I saw the third Transformers expecting it to be a 5 or 6 out of 10. I mean, that's
And it
pretty much all
wasn't.
I went there expecting.
And it wasn't.
It was better than the second.
Well, everything's better. Well, I shouldn't say everything. A lot of things are better than the second Transformers movie. I'm sure this most
True.
recent one is better.
Actually, I don't think so.
Oh.
You saw it?
I was just going to say.
No, it's based on the reviews.
Oh. See, but that's another thing, too, with the reviews. And this is actually something that's just come out from, or, you know, movie studios have been complaining about Rotten Tomatoes. And it comes down to just why just make a better movie. Like, what, you know, you're blaming people for realizing that your film is bad?
They
But-
should just see it anyway. That's what they think.
Yeah, exactly. But then I think that part of that too is now, I mean, you look at a movie and you say, okay, it made $500 million at the box office and the budget was 150. So you go, oh, they made $350 million. Well, no, that's not true. Movie studios will roughly get about 50, maybe closer to 60% of the box office revenue. The budget, when it's reported, typically does not, or very rarely, if ever, will include marketing. Marketing, depending on the movie, is going to, you know, vary. You'll see something like Marvel, where they'll be spending, you know, probably $200 million, maybe even more in marketing. Whereas you have a smaller film like Baby Driver, which is going to get significantly less, even relative to the budget. So you have to factor that in as well. So it's actually, you know, I mean, most movies turn a profit, but it's not as big as most people would assume that it is. And Hollywood obviously can do its shady-ass accounting to make more money or, you know, pay less in taxes. But they can't do shady, you know, accounting to make the movie make more money than it actually did. So again, you see movies, I mean, the budgets have just ballooned in the last decade, and yet you're not seeing a triple, quadruple increase in what the movies are adjusted for inflation. So you're spending way more money, and you're actually getting less back than you would have, you know, something like 2 decades ago. So you're seeing less of these middle budget films, which I think is where a lot of the good ones come from. I mean, Star Wars
Well, they're
would have
less
been.
formula films, I think.
That's true.
And that's why they seem more unique.
Right, and you have, and that's, you know, getting back to the whole franchise discussion where you're right, they feel unique. And it's this weird thing with people where they want new stuff, but they're also afraid of the new stuff at the same time. It's sort of this weird dichotomy with people. It's interesting, but it's also frustrating because they'll complain about something and then they'll go out and do that very same thing next Friday when the next whatever movie comes out, and oh, why can't they make a new original film? And then they go, oh look, there's a new original film. I don't want to see it because I don't know about it. It's this sort of, oh, what's it called when you have the two ideas in your head at once? Cognitive dissonance.
Bipolar.
No, that's when your
Yeah.
moods change.
Dissonance.
Yeah, so you have, and it's like you wouldn't expect everybody to do that, but pretty much everybody does. And I mean, just a game example of something like that, Call of Duty. People complain about that all the time, but it's consistently the most popular selling game every year since Modern Warfare 4 came out. Sports games, oh, they don't change anything. All they do is update the rosters, and yet every year Madden is like the second or third best selling game. And NBA 2K is usually in the top 5 or easily the top 10 every single year, despite a large portion of people complaining about how it's just the same thing. But then, why don't you go out and not buy it and maybe spend this money on something else? Because you could spend less money on a
Not to
smaller...
mention how many copies FIFA sells in Europe.
Yes, that was another one I was going to bring up too. If FIFA is honestly across the world probably the second or usually a third best-selling game. But yeah, you're right. That's another example. FIFA is huge in Europe because football is huge over there. But still, it's people buy the same thing every year. And there was actually something I read a couple years ago from, I think it was a GameStop employee, and he just casually kept track of what people bought, and he found that something like 35 or 40% of people that came in to buy stuff would buy the new Call of Duty and the new Madden, and they bought nothing else the whole year, but they would do that every year. And it's like you buy a new Madden, you buy a new Call of Duty. And, we're a bit more hardcore into playing games. I'm sure the people listening are a bit more hardcore into playing games, so they're obviously going to be trying other stuff, new stuff. Battlefield's another big franchise, but doesn't quite have the whole market dominance that Call of Duty does. Where they're going to be playing maybe not riskier games, but more diverse set of games.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just people complain about that. I've always found that interesting, and maybe I should be like a psychologist or something to kind of figure out why. What goes on in someone's brain when they complain about something but then go and do it? Is there, does there have to be like a certain time lag between them making a complaint about something before they're capable of reasoning away them wanting to go do that? Like if I had a discussion with someone about Transformers and whatever, and then 2 hours later they're going to go see the movie, would that stop them from seeing it? Because fresh in their mind is this discussion where they've basically shat all over the whole concept of it. If they would still be able to spend the money and the time to consume something they just been complaining about 2 hours ago.
Could be interesting to find out.
Could try to prime them. But then I guess how do you, ethically get away with stuff like that? Because I don't know. That's why I'm not into that. But it's just always this idea that people don't really know what they want. Wasn't Steve Jobs the one that said people don't know what they want until you give it to them? And I think that's kind of partially true.
Yeah.
That was him.
Yeah. Jobs or Wozniak. And
He was the marketer.
another thing here with franchise that I just got reminded of because I actually got the first book for the Dark Tower series, and it's bombing pretty bad at the box office right now. Reviews are terrible, based on what I've read about.
I haven't done the box office yet, isn't it?
Well, right, but I mean it's not projected to make a lot of money. The reviews are bad, and what I've been reading about the production and pre-screens and stuff is people are saying that it's as bad as they say. And they were talking about how it's just a generic action movie and things like that. So that's sort of the flip side of the franchise thing, because obviously it's very popular to turn a book series into a movie because it's got a built-in fan base. So okay, X percentage of people will spend the money to see this movie. you've already turned a profit just off of that. But taking something where, and it's starting to happen where they're doing it more into TV shows, which I like. I'm glad, because there's so much in books, and even if they're not that long, even something like Lord of the Rings, those movies are, what is it like? Doesn't it come out to about 14 hours long? The extended cuts.
Roughly.
There's
Yeah,
still
14.
stuff in the books that's not in the movies, and those books are what?
Well, aren't they
Hmm?
re-extending it further,
No,
or no?
I don't. I really can't foresee something like that happening.
I heard a rumor that Peter Jackson was releasing an extended cut, but that might have not been real.
But the problem is, like the biggest thing that I can at least remember from reading the books that they cut is a sequence with Tom Bombadil. He doesn't serve any purpose. You can cut him out of the story, and nothing else happens. And I think that's sort of, I mean, the Lord of the Rings books, they're good, but they're hard to read because they're boring. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody, but they are. They're boring. There's not a lot that happens, and there's a lot
That's
of.
your opinion.
No, but I mean, really, what? So, I mean, when you're writing a story or whatever, if it doesn't do anything to the story, it should be cut. What does Tom Bombadil do to the whole Lord of the Rings story where he has to be present for the story to work? Because they cut it out in the movie, and I think the story works in both the regular cut and the extended cut without him. And this, again, is just one example of something. I mean, why does he need to be in there? If you skipped all the chapters with him, nothing is different. Frodo doesn't change. Sam doesn't change. The world of Middle-earth is no different.
Oh yeah, it is a bit different.
How is it different from before they meet Tom Bombadil to after because of their meeting with Tom Bombadil?
Abominable's not it.
No, what I'm talking about in the book. He's in the very first book.
Yeah.
He should have been cut. He doesn't serve a literary purpose. That's what I'm saying is you have all this extra stuff, and I was just picking as an example because that's something I know. But there's always extra stuff in books that get cut out gets cut out in films. Ender's Game is a good example. I don't think that would have worked as a movie. I don't think it did work as a movie because I did not think the movie was all that good. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think it's capturing the spirit of the books because so much of the book is told with inside Ender's head. That's not really something you can do in a visual media because either you're going to have him talking to himself all the time, which maybe can work, but it's going to be a little bit weird, or you're going to have to make the whatever he's thinking be some sort of external dialogue with another character. And it is something they tried, but I don't think it worked because a huge portion of that book is in Ender's head, and a huge portion of Ender's Game is not.
That's kind of where from a book to a movie, they kind of have to add character lines in order to fulfill things that other characters think.
Mm-hmm. And I think
Because you can't show that on film.
right, and
At least it might be awkward.
well, it's what you have to do is, and this is why you see some adaptations just be great. Lord of the Rings, perfect example. They're good books. I know I was harping on them just a minute ago. I mean, they're good books. I think they should be read. But when you're converting it to a movie, you have to take advantage of what a visual media offers you versus what you have when it's written down. Because there's certain things that you can do in a book form that you can't in film or a TV show. And so you have to have some, and that's why I think part of the reason they end up being so good is because Peter Jackson is just such a, Peter Jackson and Fran and Philip are the other two writers for the movies, were just such huge fans of it, is they understood the source material and could take advantage of what the new media offered. And that's sort of what you're seeing with Game of Thrones, which I still think is funny that it's so popular because it's the TV show, after George went out and wrote these books specifically so they couldn't be filmed. But there's tons of sequences just in there where the characters talk, and the only reason that dialogue was added was because, maybe at this point in the story the character was thinking this thing, but of course we can't see inside their head, so that has to be externalized. Because there's a whole and this was added, but it kind of has some influence from stuff in the book where Kat's talking to Lisa, Rob's wife, or actually I think it might have been before they were married. Or no, it would have been right after. And that's something that she would have been thinking in the book, but has to be externalized in the show, or you're going to be completely missing that whole sort of aspect of her character, and that's what it comes down to, is taking advantage of what the medium offers. You can't just think, oh gosh, this would make a great movie, and type it out in a book form. It's not necessarily going to work, because there's things that you would see in a movie that, don't necessarily work in a written format.
Yeah, we agree.
It took you that long
Yes,
to
when
say
people
yeah?
say, when people dislike a movie or they dislike a book more, they just have to remember that the movie was made to be a movie and the book was made to flow like a book. So you got to take each one for what they are. Like you said, visual elements in a movie are different than the internal, thought process that you can go through with characters in a book.
And that's where, like I said, where I like to see books, particularly multiple novel series, turned into TV shows, because there's less content that you'd have to cut just from sort of a narrative perspective, instead of trying to cram it into 2 hours. But you also have a bit more freedom with other things that you can do as well. So this is going to wrap up part 1 of our franchise discussion. So we talked about why franchises even bother existing, and why people seem to be so enamored with them, even though they spend a lot of time complaining about them. And for the next one, we'll sort of talk about what's a good balance to strike, what is it that people like in franchises, what are successful franchises, versus what franchises either kind of pitted away or never really got off the ground, and what is the difference between the two. It is something that kind of got brought up in the beginning, but we'll do a little bit more of an in-depth breakdown of that in the next one.
We should talk about the franchises that we ourselves enjoy too, and
Yes.
what we like about them specifically.
Yes. That's exactly it. Why does this franchise work? What is good about it? And what's something similar that might have just missed the mark? We unfortunately lost Paul due to a power outage, so that's why he was here and hasn't been for a while. So he should hopefully be available for the next one. I mean, we're not really missing anything without him. That's a joke. So hopefully he can be around for the next one, and we can kind of bring him up to speed in that as well, and see if he has anything valuable to input. So thank you for listening. I'm Whoosh.
I'm Zach.
And I am Andrew.
And this is Geeks Week podcast, and hopefully you'll listen to part 2 of our franchise discussion. See ya.